Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Kuehn, and I teach astronomy at the University of Northern Colorado. So, like everyone right now, we're all probably getting a little bit stir crazy as we go through this time of having to stay home and kind of stay away from people. But fortunately, even though we're doing that, there's a lot of really cool science we can do from our own home. And as an astronomer, it's even better because while us astronomers do love our fancy telescopes that let us see things that we can't see with the naked eye, there's an awful lot we can do with the naked eye just going out on a typical night. And that's actually what I want to talk to you about today, about how right now is a perfect opportunity, in fact, one of the best opportunities you'll ever have, to go out and actually see the planet Venus with your own eyes. Now, if any of you have been outside around sunset or, shortly after sunset lately, you've probably actually seen Venus already, even if you don't necessarily realize it. So if you go out currently, look up in the sky towards the west, and about halfway up in the sky, if you're out around 9 o'clock, you'll see a really, really bright star. If it's a bit later, it'll be a bit lower in the sky towards the west. But it's really hard to miss because it's the brightest thing in the sky, other than the moon, and it looks kind of yellowish. And that, even though it looks like a star, that is actually, in fact, the planet Venus to it. So I said it's in the west currently. If you go out around 9 o'clock at night, it's about halfway up into the sky. If you go out a bit later, it'll be getting, of course, lower and lower into the sky as the night goes on, and eventually it sets around 11:30 for it. And it's pretty much the brightest thing in the night sky other than the moon. It's really hard to miss for it. And that makes it really cool to see because, as I said, it's not hard to find. It's pretty simple because it's so bright. But that raises the question, just why is Venus so bright? Well, when it comes to things in the sky, there's really two ways that they provide light for us to see. The object can actually generate its own light, and this kind of happens with things like stars that are actually undergoing fusion in their core and producing all this energy and stuff. Or they can reflect light from something else. And this is what planets and our moon does. So Venus, the moon, all the other planets in our solar system that you can see, we see them because they're reflecting light from the sun. While they do generate some of their own light, it's very, very little, and most of the light they generate is in the infrared, so not something we can see with our own eyes. But the sun gives off a lot of light, and these planets and our moon can reflect that light. And Venus reflects a lot of that light because it's covered in clouds. Lots and lots of clouds. And anyone who's ever seen an image of the Earth from space knows that the clouds look pretty bright, especially compared to the land or the water, things like that. Well, Venus is pretty much entirely covered with clouds. And those clouds are very reflective, so they reflect a lot of the light off of them, which is why it appears so bright to us. Now, the fact that the light from Venus that we see comes from reflected sunlight means that just like the moon, Venus actually goes through phases. And so if you actually have a small telescope or a decent to good pair of binoculars and go out and use those to look at Venus, you'll actually see that Venus isn't appearing as a full circle, but that it has phases. You only see a part of Venus at any one time. And currently, right now, you see about a quarter of Venus, similar to like if you see a first or third quarter moon in the sky. And that's because half of Venus is lit at any one time, but that lit side doesn't always point towards us. Sometimes the lit side entirely points to us, and we can see a full Venus. Sometimes only a part of it points towards us, and then we only see some, partial phase, like a quarter Venus, or maybe a crescent Venus, or something like that. And so that's actually really cool that it doesn't take much. A pair of binoculars, small little telescope, even the kinds you can buy in Walmart or something like that you can see that Venus has phases. And we kind of demonstrate why this works. So here's a nice diagram, but I tend to be a visual learner. I think most people are. So we'll use a model for Venus. We'll use this tennis ball. And so I've kind of divided the tennis ball up in half already. So one side I've kind of put some black tape on it. And this is going to represent the side of Venus that's away from the sun. That's not being hit by light from the sun. That's not being lit up. The green side, the normal tennis ball side, is going to be the side of Venus that is facing the sun, that's being lit, that actually that's bouncing light off, and that we would actually be able to see. for it. Now for this, I'll play the role of the sun, and you will be, well, you, standing on Earth looking at Venus. And we'll see how it looks depending on where Venus is in its orbit around the sun. So, if you remember your planets, you know that the closest planet to the sun is Mercury, next out is Venus, and then Earth, and then so on and so forth. So Venus is closer to the sun than the Earth. So at times, Venus will be directly between the sun and the Earth, which means it's going to be something like this. Because remember, the green side of my tennis ball is the lit side, the side that always has to face the sun, which is going to be me here. So when Venus is directly between the Earth, you, and the sun, that dark side of Venus is what's facing you, and you wouldn't actually see anything. It's like a new moon, or in this case, a new Venus. Now, as time goes on, Venus continues in its orbit. As it orbits, that green side always has to keep facing the sun. That's the lit side. But as it's starting to move around, some of that green side should start to become visible to you. You should start seeing a faint little sliver, a little crescent of Venus becoming visible, kind of like a crescent moon. And as this keeps moving around, you start seeing more and more and more of the green side, till we get it to about over here, where you should be seeing about half of Venus lit up and about half of Venus still dark. Kind of like a quarter moon, or in this case, once again, a quarter Venus. And then it keeps moving around, and eventually when it's on the far side of the sun, you actually have that lit side pointing all the way to you, and Venus looks like it's in its full phase. It looks like a full Venus. And then it keeps going around, and you see less and less and less of Venus until we're back to a new phase. And that's pretty neat. It's kind of cool that you can actually see that fairly easily. What's even cooler is that simple observation that you can do yourself actually played an important role in figuring out that the sun is at the center of our solar system. And the reason is due to the connection between how big Venus appears and that phase. If the sun's at the center of the solar system, and Venus and Earth are both going around it, that means when Venus is in that new phase or close to it, Venus should be as close to Earth as it gets. And hopefully we all know from everyday life that when things are closer to us, they look bigger. When they're farther away, they look smaller. So that means when Venus is in those crescent phases or that new phase, that's when it should look biggest to us. And when it's in that full phase, when it's on the far side of the sun from us, that's when it should look smallest. And that's exactly what we see. This provided some important evidence to realize that the Earth goes around the sun. Venus goes around the sun. That, in fact, everything in our solar system orbits around the sun. And so, as I said, if you go out right now and look at Venus through a pair of binoculars or telescope, you'll notice Venus is about a half Venus. And if you wait for more time to happen as we go into May, it's going to be becoming more and more of a crescent-shaped Venus before it eventually kind of disappears in June because it's going to be too close to the sun to be visible during the night. So hopefully now, the next night, where you have a good clear sky, you'll go out, take a look, see that bright object up in the sky, and go, hey, that's Venus. And maybe if you have some binoculars or a telescope, you can even see that only half of it's lit up at this time. Well, good luck with that. Good sky gazing. And please keep checking out our Facebook and Twitter pages for the University of Northern Colorado for more of these videos about what kind of science you can do in your own home. Thanks.